Hello and welcome to the Manchester is Red podcast from the Manchester Evening News. Happy New Year to you United fans. I'm your host Rich Fay, and on today's podcast I will be joined by Samuel Luckhurst as we look back to United's defeat at Nottingham Forest. We'll take a look at the transfer situation as well as the takeover one as well. Samuel, you had the pleasure of being at the City Ground.
Happy New Year, Rich.
Yeah, Happy New Year. I mean,
indeed.
Is it a Happy New Year for United fans? If we'd recorded this,
Probably not.
If we'd recorded this last week, we'd probably be giddy with excitement, saying, "Sign the contract. United are back. Where do you want your statue?" One step forward, two steps back, as has been the case all season. Though, I guess there was no real surprise either with the fact that United lost to Forest, because they do seem beatable against any opposition at the moment.
No, my dad actually messaged me after the game, just one word, shocking, and I said it isn't though. There's nothing shocking about a United defeat these days, irrespective of the opposition. That's now 14 defeats this season. That's 2 more than in the entirety of last season. They've lost as many games as they did in the Premier League last season, and I think what was, I suppose, quite striking about the Forest defeat wasn't so much that they lost, but again, it was the manner of it. And just with that half-time substitution, I think when we saw that McTominay was the only one warming up towards the end of the first half, we had a sense that, okay, he's coming on. And maybe I was overestimating Ten Hag at that time, but we all saw Ten Hag's game management last season, how good it was, and he can be innovative. He can make these tactical adjustments that have an impact on the game, but that has deserted him this season. That is a really big problem. It's, as I said, it's almost as much a problem as the defeats. And then obviously McTominay's warming up at half-time. He comes on, and as we're seeing the players coming out of the tunnel, it's like Anthony's there. I'm thinking, okay, he'd have been the one I'd have taken off, and probably a lot of United fans would have taken off. And then you find out it's Mainu, and I just thought that, right, this has really got to work, because that's going to be an unpopular move anyway. But also the methodology behind it just seems so suspect. And then of course what happens is that Forest score 2 goals where there's a void in midfield, and Ten Hag disputed that afterwards. But you only have to look at the manner of those goals and the pairing there as well. I mean, it's lest we forget, Eriksen McTominay as a midfield axis. Ten Hag abandoned that after they conceded 6 against Manchester City last season, and it was never going to be a long-term partnership anyway. And okay, with the midfield, I think it's getting to the point where I don't think there's a pairing that is going to be suitable for United, or the right pairing for the remainder of the season. That is just a fundamental issue that they'll probably only resolve in the summer, when they can freshen it up and make the right reinforcements. But looking at that first half, in the context of that first half alone, and look, we're not privy to Kobbie Mainoo's conditioning, we're not privy to the training sessions, but he was not a problem. And the first shot Forest had at goal in that game was blocked by Kobbie Mainoo. So of course, when they have 2 shots at goal, when there isn't anyone near them, and the midfielders are off the pace, and they both go in, it's going to look bad. And it's after the game, we're asking the same question of each other. It's like, what's the stat? And there's always a new stat that really reflects horrendously on United, where they find spectacular ways to plumb to new depths. And as I've said before as well, like in terms of something like the player ratings, they're kind of almost becoming an afterthought, because that player, this player, any other player, they've played badly for so long. And
what's the solution, I suppose? And I guess the other thing that maybe doesn't concern me, but from a United point of view, you look at Ten Hag, every week he's saying the injured players. Once we've got 13 or 14 players, we'll have the momentum, we'll have the consistency. That was a big part of us overperforming last season, he called it. Where put that on this run, and they took advantage of what was a floundering pack in the Premier League. But Ten Hag's putting more pressure on himself, because when these injured players come back, you expect them to be this magic one solution. And if you look at early in the season, Casemiro was poor before his injury. Mason Mount's been ineffectual at United. Even Martinez wasn't the player he was last season before his injury. If these injured players come back and United don't improve, there is no mitigation there for Ten Hag, is there?
No. And Casemiro in his last Premier League start, he was hooked at half-time against Brentford because he was dreadful. He was heavily culpable for their goal. He was performing badly before then. I think with Martinez, of the long-term players who've been absent, he's the only one where you say, yeah, they've missed him. He didn't start the season well, but he was clearly still being troubled by his foot injury. Mount has not been a good signing. I think a lot of people were quite dubious of Mount coming to United. And Ten Hag said on Friday, described them as 5 or 6 new signings, which again, it's not the kind of rhetoric fans want to hear. If there were literally 5 or 6 new signings coming in after a group has come in to invest in the club, then I think they would get excited. But I don't think anybody's going to be excited about Tyrone Marshall coming back into the United squad, with the greatest of respect to him.
Of those players who are injured, who actually gets into the team for you, do you think Casemiro does on the principle of his reputation last season, or do you think it is only Martinez who's got an actual chance of improving that starting 11? I
think Casemiro probably has to, because for the balance of it, and it would be, I think everybody would like to see him play with Kobbie Mainoo in a competitive game and see how they'd get on, because that does have potential as a partnership. It's not going to be long term, just by virtue that Casemiro is turning 32 next month and he has succumbed to second season syndrome. But I wouldn't be rushing to get Mason Mount back in the team. And this always happens with players who spend a spell on the sidelines. Their reputation repairs itself just without them doing anything, because it gives the illusion that they're being missed if things aren't going well. And of course things are not going well at United. But there has to be method to them coming back in. Martinez is an automatic pick, as you said. I think Casemiro has to be, because the alternative is Sofiane Amrabat, who has not been a good signing and is going to be out of the picture for probably a month now, more or less, best part of the month with AFCON and representing Morocco. But going back to the injury excuse, Ten Hag keeps saying it's not an excuse, but he's bringing it up so often that he is essentially playing it as an excuse card. And he's not the first manager to do that. I'd say, in fact, every manager has done it, and they use that method as well. I mean, Eddie Howe didn't get much sympathy recently when he's saying, we've been hit harder than any other team. Like, boo-hoo, Eddie, you were bought out by Estate a couple of years ago, and you have spent a fair bit as well. And if, it's no one's fault but your own or Dan Ashworth's if you decide to let Chris Wood go and he returns to score a hat-trick against you.
Or you sell out to Elanga.
Yeah, welcome to the big league, etc. But with United, what I would say is that their attack has not been hit too much by injuries this season, and they've still been impotent in front of goal by and large. At the weekend, it's different in that they've got both out-and-out strikers missing. But again, that goes back to the poor planning. They did not sell Marshall when they should have done. They did not buy a proven goal scorer in the summer when they should have done. It's got so bad at United to the point where, and he was missed, Højlund, but this is a striker who scored 1 goal in 15 Premier League games, and it's like the world has ended that he's not at the club. He's not at the City Ground for the Forest game. And of course, we know that it's going to be Rashford up front, it's going to be Antony on the right. But that's part of Ten Hag's problem. It's too predictable. Like Forest won't have known, I imagine, that Højlund was going to be out. But it's not like they have to rejig much to adapt. It's like, Antony's playing, rubbing their hands with glee. Rashford's up front. Okay, he scored quite a good goal, but I think the manner of that goal, it was in that left-hand channel. It was him in his prime position, essentially, at that point. I don't think the centre-halves would have been unduly concerned that Rashford was going to be United centre-forward. And then you look at when it was 1-0 and who's warming up on the touchline but Donny van der Beek. And I'm just thinking, this is the understatement of this very early year, but it's just not a good look if you're the manager.
Not at all. I think as well, another key issue for United is they conceded so quickly after drawing level again. We've spoken about the mentality so often this season. I know when we were at the Villa game, we had that sort of list of all the times they've conceded twice in quick succession.
Yeah, a goal gluts, yeah.
But then it's also switching off after you've just scored as well, because I know there's the cliche, you're most vulnerable when you've just scored, and United were definitely looking to push. I mean, if they'd gone and got a second, you'd probably praise Ten Hag for saying that they went and got the game by the scruff of the neck. But ultimately, they switched off, they carved open far too easily. And if you look back at that goal, Morgan Gibbs-White is in so much space. Why do you think it is that United just have this sort of mentality issue and their in-game management is still so problematic?
I think there are just some players there that they don't have the character or the wherewithal to cope with those testing circumstances during a game. Looking back at the Gibbs-White goal, I couldn't make up my mind at first whether it was Wan-Bissaka who was culpable or McTominay, because they both should have been aware of him. I think Johnny Evans was actually literally pointing him out as well, that there's a guy on the edge of the area who someone is going to have to attend to. Looking back on it on Match of the Day, I mean, Wan-Bissaka can see him, like, where it's... United are conceding goals at the moment that five-a-side teams do not concede. And these are not like semi-amateur five-a-side teams. These are just like a bunch of work colleagues who do it for the sheer enjoyment. If the danger is there, you go towards it. Wan-Bissaka must see the danger just through his eye line where he's looking, and he doesn't go to Gibbs-White. And look, we can talk about Wan-Bissaka's character and defects there for a long time, but he's not the biggest problem at United, but that is part of the problem. And you think back to this time last year, Ten Hag had come off that New Year's Eve win at Wolves where man management, in-game management, it was seen as an absolute masterclass, and rightly so, because he dropped Rashford for disciplinary reasons. He brought him on at half-time. Rashford scored the winning goal. Like, when you're hot, you're hot. And Rashford was at that time, and so was Ten Hag as well. He was affecting games. He'd read Ronaldo the riot act. He'd seen off Ronaldo. His position of authority was possibly as high as it could be. And also, the mentality in the team was spot on. It was mid-January that they beat City, coming from 1-0 down. And that day, as fortunate as the equalising goal was, it was City whose focus went, and United capitalised on it and scored quickly a few minutes later. But these have been recurring themes for United season. They just concede. If they're not conceding after scoring quickly, if they're not conceding goal gluts, they are conceding goals from cutbacks. And Mark Ogden, I mean, he was quite interrogative of Ten Hag afterwards. His post-match press conference, he said the same mistakes are being repeated. Happened against Bayern Munich, happened against Galatasaray. Why? And Ten Hag's first thing is about, we have to swap players. And it's going back to the injury excuse. But these things were happening when they had a fullish squad at the start of the season. When, look, if you're losing 3-2 at home to Galatasaray and you're conceding goals that have already been conceded earlier in the season, as they had been against Bayern Munich, Brighton, Arsenal, there is a fundamental problem. That was early October. We're now in early January. Whatever his message to the players, whatever the coaches are telling them to do, the message is just not getting through. And look, the fault is on both sides there. The coaches are not being strident enough, probably, with the players, and the players are just not taking it on board. And look, there are a lot of players in that squad that we know they can't be there next season. Their number was up some time ago, but there's a hell of a lot of. We're only halfway through the season, and it is still salvageable. But there's every chance it will get worse before it gets better.
That is, maybe the damning indictment for United at the moment. I suppose if you're trying to have a silver lining, you try and clutch at straws, it is that there has been new investment in the club. It needs to be ratified and signed off by the Premier League yet. But David Brailsford was there at the City ground and sat next to Sir Alex Ferguson. They also have a big job on their hands, don't they? And where do you start? Because it is structural, it's deep-rooted, it's not as easy as they come in, it's a magic one solution, United change overnight. It's going to have to take gradual change. Do you still think that for all the criticism that's valid of this United team, their failings on the pitch, that unless those sort of structural changes happen in the hierarchy, that we're just going to be in this cycle for forever, really?
Oh, absolutely. The priority has to be the structure. They've got to get that right. They've got to have different personnel in. They need a recruitment specialist, which I think they will get. It'll be interesting to see who that choice is. Kees Vos. It's funny that, the fact that Kees Vos, I know he gives the illusion that Old Trafford is his second home, but he isn't there as often as he gives that impression. But it was no surprise whatsoever to see him there for the Boxing Day game when everyone knew that Dave Brailsford was going to be there. But I suspect that INEOS will be giving any future SEG clients a swerve unless there's a compelling case to sign one of them. And as I said, they've got to get a recruitment specialist in. They've got to figure out whether to retain John Murtagh in a more administrative role. What will that role be? There already is a head of football operations at the club, Dave Harrison, who joined last season from Everton. Darren Fletcher's technical director remit. Are they happy with that? Can that be finessed, or is that to be just done away with altogether? I think there's merit in terms of keeping some of these people on board, but there's also merit in other departments as well, just away from the structural side of it, of freshening it up, because there are some people, there are a lot of good people at Manchester United who do really good jobs, but there are also some people there who are frankly stealing a living. And I'm not just talking about some of the players. There are certain people that you're supposed to have dealings with there, and one has barely ever spoken to them for one reason or another. And so the structure has to be right. And of course, in terms of recruitment, they've got to be a lot more fastidious with that. They've got to do proper due diligence. That's not been the case. I mean, with the Van der Beek news yesterday, it was obviously not a surprise whatsoever. It had been in the post for a while. But when you look at their signings since that summer of 2019, where it was, recruitment reboot, we want British players. The three senior signings that summer, one has gone. They wanted one gone last summer in Maguire. One could be going this summer in Wan-Bissaka. The following year, it's no British signings, and the senior players, two of them have gone, Cavani and Telles, and the third has gone. Van der Beek could be gone for good. I say senior players because Ahmad and Pellistri were teenagers at that time. Solskjaer's final summer, Sancho is going, Ronaldo is gone, Varane is probably going this year. You look at that, that's what, I think apart from Fernandes, who was a mid-season signing, and you'd probably say he's the only one of those players still at the club who is guaranteed to be at United next season, because with Maguire, you don't know what could happen. As I said, with Wan-Bissaka, that's up in the air. You look at how different those summers are in terms of the personnel they're going for. It's all over the place. And look at the results. How many of them have been successful? One, Fernandes. And of course, that's without mentioning this Ten Hag era, where there has been this favouritism, frankly, or preference for players with a Dutch association, whether they've played for the Netherlands national team or played for Ajax or played in the Eredivisie, or their agent is Kees Vos. And that's just no way to go about running a football club. And we all said that at the start of last season, and we probably maintained it after they had that uproarious defeat of Liverpool when Tyrone Marshall came in for his full debut and did brilliantly, and Martinez had a terrific night. And Martinez has been, I think, if he was playing this season, I don't think United's results would be as bad. And he'd probably be the only other player from these recent signings in the last 4 or 5 years, along with Fernandes, that you would bracket as an outright success. But you can't say that of Martinez when he's been missing for nearly 4 months now in his second season. But I still maintain you can say he's been a successful signing just on the strength of his first season. And really, the way they've operated it, look, I get it. They've got a veto. The club have a right to a veto. The manager has a right to a veto. There have been times where that has worked out quite well in that the club, I think quite rightly, they vetoed a move for Hakim Ziyech last summer. In hindsight, if they could have got him on loan instead of Anthony, that might have been the right way about it. But at the time, I think people saw United going for Hakim Ziyech.
Yeah, there's Arnautovic as well.
Arnautovic, exactly. Not good. But then you've got the time when the recruitment department are saying sign Pau Torres, and Ten Hag is saying no, I want Lisandro Martinez. And at the time, that could have gone one way or the other, but that's been vindicated. But that's an isolated case. Where's the scrutiny with Andre Onana, in the sense that Ten Hag would have known he was leaving on a free, and he was leaving the same summer that he was leaving Ajax. Why not get him there? Why not be decisive? And then 12 months later, they're spending nearly £50 million on him. And unfortunately for them, there was no player who cost United more in the Champions League than the goalkeeper. You only have to look at the mistakes he made. So, I mean, you could write a book or talk all day about the recruitment at United in the last, I'd say 15 years. I'd go back to post Ronaldo.
Yeah, well, it's always sometimes a myth, isn't it? When you talk about this sort of decade of despair, United were still on the decline before Ferguson had retired, weren't they? I mean, their transfer track record was poor. Yeah. Fergie was getting a lot out of the players at his disposal, but it's not as if that was an amazing United team, the last one that won the title either.
No, the last two teams, they those achievements were enhanced by the milestone. 2011, it was the 19th title. They'd overtaken Liverpool. 2013, it was Ferguson's last title. It was the 20th title, a nice round number. But that 2011 team, I maintain that was probably Ferguson's worst title winning side. But the quirk of it was that they also got to an FA Cup semi-final and Champions League final. But there was so much mitigation around them advancing that point that season. And also the Premier League, the quality of the season was pretty poor. I think United might have ended that season with 80 points and they finished 9 points clear. It was not a competitive Premier League season. It's nowhere as intense as it is now, or like when 2016-17, when you had Klopp, Conte, Guardiola, Mourinho, Pochettino all managing the same league, where the quality was really ramped up from the previous couple of seasons when Leicester had won it in 2016, where, I mean, look, as miraculous as it was for Leicester to have won the Premier League title, it had to have been a low quality season, and it very much was. But United can't get away with that now, and they have been exposed by these other clubs, as Chelsea have been exposed as well. That I think maybe 10 years ago, not 10 years ago, sorry, 8 or 9 years ago, when United were spending quite a lot of money under Van Gaal, I think there was a sense that, you know, United won't go 20 odd years without winning the title because they've got the financial clout and the money will make the difference. We have come to discover that it really doesn't work out that way. Unlike 20 odd years ago with Chelsea, when Abramovich took over, you knew that the money was going to make a difference, and it did quite quickly. But they also did get it right with some very, very key appointments, and also good, stating the obvious, good recruitment.
Well, it's often, I've noticed myself, that when a team spends loads of money, it's very easy to write off their achievement. But United are proof that you've got to invest the money properly as well, because it's not just having the money, it's spending it properly. But we will discuss transfers in part 2 and 3 of today's podcast. Join us after this short break. We're launching a brand new bite-sized midweek audio-only podcast, bringing you the latest happenings from Old Trafford in a much more informal format, covering topical news, online gossip, transfers and personal tales as a roundup of everything you might have missed surrounding Manchester United. Join host Tyrone Marshall and myself, Rich Fay, as we go inside the club, separating the fact from the fiction and giving you an edge on your mates down the pub. Hello and welcome back to the Manchester is Red podcast and the Manchester Evening News. I'm Rich Fay, joined by Samuel Luckhurst. Samuel, I think we both said sort of before the festive period that, you know, if United had lost to West Ham, Villa and Nottingham Forest, there would maybe be insurmountable pressure on Erik ten Hag's job. They lost 2 of them. But is there any point in changing the manager right now while there is this takeover situation occurring? And like you said, bigger decisions probably to be made at the club rather than the manager right now.
See, I think there is probably a compelling argument now to change. I'm still not at that point of writing the Ten Hag must go piece. Had they lost both games last week, then I don't see how they couldn't not have sacked him. They'd have had 15 defeats and lost 6 games in December. And look, managers have been sacked for less than what we've seen from United this season. If a manager had presided over this kind of season at Bayern Munich or Real Madrid, they'd have been long gone. And I get it that United operate in a different way, and there's a lot of context to it as well. And because there's been a power vacuum there as well, that has actually made Ten Hag's job secure. we can't say that now, because although INEOS is still waiting for the regulatory approval, any big decision that United are due to take has to be signed off by them. And okay, if Ten Hag is to go, it's going to be INEOS saying to Joel Glazer, we want a change of manager. Can we have that signed off? It's not going to be John Murtough going to Joel Glazer and saying, I think we need a change, because everyone knows he's on borrowed time, and whenever there is whenever the next managerial change comes at Manchester United, I think it's safe to assume that it's not going to be John Murtough presiding over that process, as he did with Ten Hag in 2022. But the argument is that because January is so clear, that I think they can have technically a maximum of 4 games, because if they were to draw with Wigan, it triggers a replay. They've got the Tottenham game. If they get through in the FA Cup, it's a 4th round. But realistically, I think we all expect them to have 3 games this month, unless 18th place Wigan of League One somehow pull off a shock next Monday. And where it's so clear, there's the argument that change manager, new coach comes in, he coaches the players within an inch of their lives, with a view to having a very good run in where they could finish in the top 4 and possibly win the FA Cup. The drawback, if they were to do that, is that I don't know who that new manager would be, because there's not a compelling available candidate out there. And I think that is now that INEOS are pretty much on board, that's what's keeping Ten Hag in the role. You look at Graham Potter; he didn't have the personality to handle Chelsea, and okay, I think he was probably the wrong man at the wrong club at the wrong time, and that wasn't entirely his fault. But he doesn't have the personality to manage Manchester United. I'm not convinced of that whatsoever. Zinedine Zidane, if he was such a compelling coaching candidate for these other big clubs, he'd have been appointed by another big club by now. His situation at Real Madrid was so unique, and even United know that as well. He's never been in the run-in to take over at United, even going back to 2018 when it was all kicking off between Mourinho and Pogba. It was just, he was the available name, so of course he was going to be on the top of bookies' chalkboards. Who else is there? Like Hansi Flick, is there going to be a demand for him? I don't think so. Julen Lopetegui couldn't hack it at Wolves. Why would you have him at United? There's no one out there there's not a coach out there who is unattached at the moment. Neil Warnock, you wouldn't have him either. Nobody is a compelling case to come in. Whereas with Van Gaal in 2015,
well, it sounds like Wayne Rooney's about to be sacked like Birmingham. So
I'd be extremely worried.
In fact, producer Seb saying he has been sacked now. So
has he? Wow.
While we're on air, so there's your candidate.
You're not gonna get me making a case for that. But that's I think possibly the funniest thing about that. I mean, it's not funny that someone has lost their job at all, but the funny figure in all that is the clown Gary Cook, who used to be at Manchester City. And when you think of what he said about Rooney earlier in the season, that appointment, my goodness, why is he even at a football club?
Wow. Yeah, well, I mean, I guess to bring that onto Ten Hag, though, do you think there is an argument to say, look, Ten Hag's almost had his hands tied working in this structure. Does he not deserve a chance in this new look United to prove himself as a manager almost again? Because I know, like, it's being used in favour of Potter. It said, well, Potter was part of this set up at Chelsea where he's destined to fail. Do you not think there's an argument to say, well, Ten Hag's had similar at United, where, look, if you put him in a proper football structure, he might still be the man for United, or are you not convinced, sort of bottom line on that?
No, because I think, in fairness, I think United have had a structure. It's not right, and it needs fixing. But I mean, there's the occasional pundit who goes, oh, they don't even have a sporting director. Well, no, they don't by title, but they do have a football director. Like, they're pretty much the same thing. It's just, you get a bit pedantic about it. Yeah, precisely. But they've got head of football operations, head of recruitment, head of scouting, head of data. They've got a football transfer negotiator. I think literally they've got a technical director. I think every position you'd expect a big club to have in a structure, they have got someone in it as far as I can see. I don't think I'm really missing out anything. Okay, at the moment the chief executive is an interim, but I think that's going to be addressed pretty soon with Brailsford and Jean-Claude Blanc coming onto the football board, and they need to clarify who's going to occupy that role, because it's an extremely important role as well. But they need different personnel in there. They need a recruitment specialist, because just look at the hit rate in the last 10 to 15 years. It's dire. It's so poor, and they didn't have the courage when they made that inaugural football director appointment. One, they couldn't even call him a director of football for whatever reason, but also they looked to someone on their own doorstep, and they were telling us around the time of the Solskjaer's permanent appointment that they were close to appointing a technical director. I mean, the title kept changing names. It was a technical director, it was a director of football, it was a football director in the end, and then it was a football director and a technical director appointed simultaneously. And there's been merit in that, because Darren Fletcher, it's not that he knows the club or anything like that. He's a vital conduit in that he's across the academy, so he'll know which players from the academy that they've got an eye on to come into the first team, come into first team training. Murtaugh's got a lot of experience. He jointly ran the academy at one point, so there is some merit to having Murtaugh in a more administrative role at the football club, because of course INEOS are not just taking over the first team, it's obviously the academy, it's the women's team as well. Murtaugh helped recruit the players for the women's team when they entered the second tier of the WSL in 2018. So I don't have a great deal of sympathy for Ten Hag at the moment. The injuries, yeah, if you've got that something like 10 or 11 players missing at Forest, fair enough, that is going to take its toll. But you look at the team they put out in these games where they lose, you still look at it and you think that should be, if they're all performing, that should be good enough to win the game.
Well, that's what annoys me the most, is that some of the teams they've played, even weaker sides should be beating them. You can't keep on saying that because Martez isn't playing, that's why we've lost to Forest. That is just fundamentally not good enough, because they didn't create enough chances. The midfield was ineffectual. Strikers didn't have enough of the ball. You can't pin it all on, like you said, maybe a centre mid and a centre back be missing, because you still have enough.
No, and look, I think one of the other issues with him, or one of the problems he's got, is that in press conferences, the stock phrases coming out too often, and also it feels like he's not been as strident in his criticism of the players. One, because the players were getting fed up of it, and I think he clearly got wind of it. But that kid glove approach, look where it got Solskjaer. And also Ten Hag was brought in as a disciplinarian, someone who's going to be really authoritative. If you start compromising on that, you're a dead man walking. And I don't agree with that way of approaching it. And at the moment he's saying about you look at the top teams in the league, we went head to head with them, and he's talking about Arsenal, they lost in added time, Liverpool they drew, Villa they won from coming behind. Fair enough. But also of the other top four teams last season, Arsenal beat them, City beat them, Newcastle beat them. Newcastle beaten them twice this season.
But it's also,
and it's not about the top teams. No. They've lost against Forest.
Exactly. This is the Solskjaer thing. Solskjaer beat City 3 times in the same season. Doesn't mean he was the best manager in the world.
No.
Beating the best teams counts for very little if you're losing to teams in the bottom routinely.
And especially if you could end this evening, we're talking on the Tuesday night, United could drop down to 8th. And 8th doesn't even get you Europe. And every week there seems to be a little detail emerging, like something like that, just dropping down a little bit more on the table, where it counts considerably against the manager. And INEOS must be looking at that and thinking, do we change? If it was to happen, I don't think there would be this outcry.
Yeah, well, we've seen previously, haven't we, that some managers are only sacked when their team's mathematically out of the Champions League. That's happened for United.
Yeah.
They could be sacked when United are mathematically can't qualify for Champions League again, when they're out of the League Cup or out of the League Cup. FA Cup, if they're to be dumped out of the FA Cup as well, then you are literally just playing for maybe in 5th this season and try to get one of those fortuitous places back in the Champions League. I mean, how bad would it have to get for change to happen? Because you make the case that United could potentially only play 2 matches this month. Surely that's the perfect time to bring a new manager in so we can actually work with the players. Yeah. I know some will be away at AFCON, some players will maybe have a break and some time away from the club as well, just because of the fixture schedule. But if you don't sack the manager this month, when do you actually do it before the end of the season? Do you think it has to get to that stage where, look, United are out of all competitions and they mathematically can't qualify for the Champions League? But in that case, do you bring a manager in before the end of the season, or do you just bring them in the summer?
I genuinely do not think they will lose to Wigan next week. But if they do lose,
Right, clip that up.
But if they do lose to the 18th place team in League One, I don't see why or how he can be coming back into Carrington the next morning or the next day. I think at that point, yeah, the game is well and truly up. Because you can imagine the sheer embarrassment of a defeat like that. But as I said, I don't think it will happen. So then you're looking ahead to the Tottenham game. There's a chance Ratcliffe will be at that game, and already we've got this Moyes-Fergie style scenario that United are getting hammered in the Moyes season and the camera pans to Ferguson. And already we've got United losing and the camera is panning to Dave Brailsford. It's going to be a pretty, despite the lack of games, I think it's going to be quite a fascinating month to see how United operate, what dealings they do in the transfer market, because that's almost becoming an afterthought amid their dreadful form, that they need a goal scorer in. They actually need to make a signing this summer, someone who's going to come in, and whether it's a short-term fix or a long-term fix, but someone who's actually going to bump up the numbers in terms of goals output, because their top scorers this season jointly have got 6 goals each. That's appalling midway through a season for Manchester United. And of course, there are players that they need to sell this month as well, permanently. We'll see what happens there. But it is, as I said, I'm still not at the point where I'm writing that piece that Ten Hag has to go. And look, going to Carrington on Friday, it was actually a departure from the norm somewhat, but also quite pleasant that you go to a game, there's decent bonhomie between manager and reporters. You're looking forward to the game. United are quite confident. They've come off a good win. They're going into a game feeling quite buoyant, having had such a spirited and uplifting comeback as they did against Villa. And it's a reminder of what it was like quite often last season. You look back to that month of February last season where they had 8 games in 26 days. They won 6, drew 2, knocked out Barcelona, ended the month in the top 4 comfortably, and won a cup final. And that showed the capabilities of the squad. But unfortunately also, I think that might be their peak under Ten Hag. And you look more and more at that February month last season. I look at it now as it's like an international team at a tournament. There's this big month of condensed games. 8 games is 1 game more, I think, than having to get to the final of the Euros or the World Cup. And United essentially used it as an international tournament where they were absolutely switched on with their focus. They as I said, they won 6 of the games. They didn't lose. They pretty much got the job done at every level possible. And they did all of that without Weghorst starting up front in every game. That's how switched on they were and how impressive they were. And you can't just blame the drop-off this season on injuries. It's been bad recruitment. Certain characters aren't up to it. Certain players, their form has just tailed off because they've not got the appetite, or there are other issues or whatnot. There are a myriad of reasons why they've dropped off this season, but that's got to be the frustrating thing for Ten Hag. They showed last season what they are capable of. This season, they seem incapable of it.
That's all for part 2 of the Manchester is Red podcast. Join us for part 3, where we take a look at the transfer window and have a brief chat about that trip to Wigan as well. No one covers Manchester United quite like the Manchester Evening News, and through our MUFC Pro app, you can support our journalism and become part of our United community, getting the best experience ad-free, pop-up-free and distraction-free as well, giving you the best news and interviews, great features and much more. Now is the perfect time to subscribe, as we've just launched a special New Year offer which includes MEN Premium for just £12 for 12 months. Download the app and get started today.
Welcome back to the Manchester is Red podcast. Samuel, then, transfer window. Are you looking forward to this one or not? Because we often joke that we dread the transfer windows and have to shoot down incessant reports, usually from Portugal, about United linked to someone. This month, though, it's mainly about sales, isn't it? You've mentioned there in part 2 that United do need to sign someone by the end of the month, but in order to do so, facilitate that, they need to be getting rid of players first. And as we've seen historically, it's far easier said than done for United to actually sell players.
Goodness, yeah, that's putting it mildly. Even I've just already got the vision of Donny van der Beek returning for the first day of pre-season at Carrington in July. He would have to perform like a demon for Eintracht Frankfurt to agree to that deal. And look, I think it's 11 million euros rising to 14 million euros. That's their option to buy. And if they take up that option, that's a big loss United are making on a 26-year-old Netherlands international.
He's still so young, isn't he? That is what is unfathomable.
It's another deal where you have to take stock of it in terms of the circumstances that surrounded United signing him, and also why he went from this player who was bound for Real Madrid before the COVID pandemic into someone who has been in exile from the Dutch squad for 3 years nearly, and has started 4 meaningful Premier League matches in 3.5 years for Man United. There's a lot of that is on Van der Beek, but a lot of it is on United. I mean, going back to that time, he was on a short list, but Solskjaer would have rather have had Jack Grealish or James Maddison. The problem for United was obviously, one, the pandemic hit. Because I think if there was no COVID-19 pandemic, I think Aston Villa get relegated that season and they have to sell Grealish, and United are first in line to get him, and they get Grealish. So they have it all on Grealish, but then Villa stay up on the final day. At that point, they're not under any pressure to sell. United, because of the pandemic partly, have not got the funds to dedicate on spending big on certain players. So and also it was Sancho was their prime target that summer as well. And by that point, James Maddison had got wind that United wanted Grealish, so he signed a new contract with Leicester. So there's no way that he's leaving. At Ajax, there is Van der Beek, who's available for £35 million up front, who United had shortlisted, and Ajax have to sell a player every summer. Here's someone who's going to Real Madrid, who has got good pedigree, who did brilliantly for Ajax in their previous season when they got to the Champions League semi-final. I remember when that deal was done, the consensus was overwhelmingly positive. I don't think anybody looked at that and thought, that's bad business for United. They were getting a player for half the fee that Grealish would have cost at that point, and everyone had seen the potential of him at the Champions League, in the Champions League in those games against Real Madrid and Juventus. But the problem was, and this is why it's particularly relevant now, was that the manager didn't want him. And of course, with Ten Hag, he's been getting players that he definitely wants, that are definitely his signings. And Van der Beek is an example of a club signing a player for the manager, rather than the manager essentially buying the player for himself. And it doesn't always work out. And Solskjaer just didn't want him. And we will remember those first. I mean, Van der Beek came on and scored in his debut. He came on at Brighton, and I think he chased the ball down to get the corner that leads to that penalty that United score after the game had actually ended. They had to restart the game for it and then get a win there. He had a big role in the winning goal at Newcastle in their next Premier League win. At the start, people wondering, why are you not starting this guy? Then he did start, and I think we all realised that's why Solskjaer hasn't started.
Was it West Ham away?
West Ham away, yeah. That was, I think he started the first time in the Premier League the week before at Southampton, did reasonably well, comeback win, and I think they had a midfield diamonds. Yeah, Cavani got a couple of goals. But then at West Ham a week later, United 1-0 down at half-time, and Van der Beek is the one who makes way. I don't think he ever actually recovered from that at United. I think that could have been seen as the final nail in the coffin for him there and then. As I said, he started 4 meaningful Premier League games in 3.5 years, and that was the second, and that was December 2020. And Ten Hag came in, and I think he had an injury a little bit at the start of last season, but you never got the sense that he was going to turn it around. I remember even pre-season in Perth, and Van der Beek started against Aston Villa, and he just, the way I described it at the time was that he looked like a Glyndebourne enthusiast who turned up at Glastonbury by mistake. Like he operated at a completely different pace from the rest of his teammates, and this was someone who was already 2 years into his career at United. He couldn't hack it. Everton on loan. I mean, I think that'll be one of these quizzes. Like, can you remember that Donny van der Beek played for Everton briefly? So it's an interesting case study. Van der Beek just going through his United career, the circumstances behind signing him, why it didn't work out, and it's not exactly a cautionary tale because there've been so many recent signings that have gone awry. But it is a decent reminder of what happens if you're not completely on the same page as the manager or aligned with recruitment. But sometimes you do just have to say no. And I don't think we've even mentioned Anthony, but you look at the checks and balances for signing in Ten Hag's first summer, his first and last signing, Malacia and Anthony. And it was all about, Tyrone Marshall impressed him playing for Feyenoord against Ajax when Ten Hag was Ajax coach. For Marshall to have impressed, he had to have performed against Anthony. That is not a litmus test of a Manchester United fullback. And I barely watched Anthony, but just looking at him and looking at the clips of him, I did not get an impression that this was someone who was absolutely tailor-made for Man United. And he just looks a complete write-off. If the new manager comes in later on this year, I don't think anybody's necessarily expecting Anthony to flourish under them. So in terms of the dealings this month, yes, Van der Beek has gone, maybe not permanently. Sancho, if he's still at the club this time next month, then something has gone badly wrong there because he's had 4 months to prepare for a departure. He should be going probably permanently this month, but it's not like anything has been suggested to be imminent there at all just yet. And I suppose
do you think that the Marge situation as well plays into that? Though?
I was just about to say,
what's the point of selling Sancho if you maybe get rid of Ten Hag anyway?
Yeah, I mean, I'd always say the principle of a very unapologetic player who accused the Man United manager of lying publicly. I think you need to get shot of them for good. It doesn't matter who the next manager is, but whether INEOS are of that viewpoint remains to be seen. And of course, I think it will also be, say Ten Hag is in charge in early February and Sancho is still there. I think it'll be telling if they're both still at the club, because the way it's going, at least one of them cannot be at the club by the end of this transfer window. And at the moment, you'd still say that has to be Sancho, and I completely agree with that. But we have seen how things quickly can change. Marshall, in the summer, he was unsellable because he was injured for almost the entirety of it. We've come around to January and he's not been in the picture for 3 weeks. I think it's been. He's been unwell. He's been unavailable. Not been seen in any training imagery or footage either. But this is the last window they have to obtain a fee for him, if that's at all possible. I suspect it's. I mean, he's such a tough sell. He's a tough sell to even a Saudi Pro League club. Just the injury record, the lack of goals. It's not a compelling case to go out and sign someone like that at this stage. But he's going to be available on a free in the summer, and there would be clubs that would look at him and say, yeah, he's worth taking. He's not completely a lost cause. He's 28. There's maybe a relatively big club in him yet for him to have a decent next 5 years or end of his career. But I think there's a long shot for United to be getting a fee for him this month.
What do you think a realistic January transfer window looks like for United? Then we're recording this 2nd January. Donny van der Beek, like I said, has been loaned out with the view to make it permanent. Sancho, you'd potentially line up. Marshall, if an offer came in. You've also got, like I said, Wan-Bissaka and Hannibal, both technically out of contract at the end of the season. If an offer came in for them, then potentially you'd have to certainly listen to it. What is the realistic though? Do you think United do sign anyone by the end of the month? Do you think that those big players do actually leave?
I don't think, the way it stands, just because of Marshall's situation with where he's just out of the picture because he's unwell, I think that's just, a lot would have to happen for him to not be at United this time next month. It's very difficult to shift someone when they're injured, or whether they're or if they've got an ailment. And also, normally by this time, his agent has made it very clear that Marshall wants to go, or Marshall is going. And I've not heard a peep from Philippe Lambelet. He's undermined a couple of Manchester United managers in the past, but he's not gone to that length just yet with Ten Hag. And with Sancho, as I said, he has to go. I find it very strange the way they're going about these contract extensions, because yesteryear a player was notified that their 1 year option had been taken up by a letter in the post, which is very bizarre. Now it just seems as though United are beating about the bush with certain players, like with Wan-Bissaka and Hannibal Mejbri. There is, okay, they're not first teams necessarily, but there's clear resale value in those two. You can imagine Wan-Bissaka playing for the majority of other Premier League clubs next season. So you are going to trigger that extension at some point. The prospect of him playing abroad, I can't see that. I don't think anybody can see that. So why are they just not? Because Ten Hag has said we're having talks with the players. Well, it shouldn't work that way. All they've got to do is just, have the player into the office and say, we've extended your contract. It doesn't mean that we'll keep you beyond the summer, but you're an important member of the squad. We see value in you. You're an asset. We've got to protect you as an asset as well. And we'll reassess your situation in the summer. You're going to get opportunities. Let's see how we go from there. And if we're going to negotiate a new contract, we will do. If we're going to negotiate a transfer, we will do. It's not difficult, but United are making it difficult. Like they're not. Hannibal Mejbri, they spent 10 million euros on in 2019. He's had some decent first team exposure this season. There is every chance that he'll move abroad at some point this year, but obviously you want to obtain a fee for that. So what's the delay? What's the wait?
Especially when they've been so ruthless with youth players in the last sort of 2 windows or so. If they've realised a youth player is not going to make it, they cash in on them.
And you've got to try and get a better fee for them as well.
Yeah.
The ones who, pretty much all of them who left in the summer, they were just almost given away to...
And it was this sell of, well, there's a massive sell-on clause if they do well.
Yeah.
But there's a huge if, isn't it,
yes.
ultimately?
Yeah. I mean, none of them made a move that really, made you sit back and take notice. I mean, did Ethan Laird, who I thought at one point had a decent chance of having a career at United. Did he go to QPR? Or was it Birmingham? Was it Birmingham? It was at QPR on loan last season, but he joined Birmingham permanently this season, I think. And you look at we only just discussed Birmingham earlier. Look where they are. It's not going well for anyone there.
Wigan, like you said, 18th in League One. Do you ring the changes for that game in a week's time? Do you want to see the likes of Ahmad start a match? Do you want to try and give some players who have been on the periphery a chance to prove themselves? Or do you think, look, there's only 2 games potentially this month. You have to win it and you have to play your strongest team available. I mean, the question was asked even with Ten Hag, would Onana be available for the Wigan game? Would you even play him? Would you play Binder instead?
Well, the talk in the mood at United is, why would you rotate heavily? I mean, I don't think we're going to see a team akin to the 11 that Sir Alex Ferguson occasionally put out in FA Cup games. But it's almost a decent quiz question. The 11 that started against Exeter in that 0-0 draw back in 2005, and it's some very, very niche names would have appeared in that team. Whereas with this Wigan one, because they're coming off the back of a defeat as well, and the FA Cup was their only chance of silverware this season, and where the month is so clear as well, they have to play. It's going to be a strong team that plays that game. I think the goalkeeper situation, again, United are making a mountain out of a molehill there. Like, Onana's not been performing at a level that suggests that he will be sorely missed. You're going to have to play Bayindir at some point. If you're really trying to keep Andre Onana for a game against a League One team, it just looks a bit strange.
Now, also, it doesn't reflect well on Bayindir, who they said was
Doesn't reflect well on,
as well.
Doesn't reflect well on either of them. I remember earlier in the season, I think with the Palace League Cup game, it was seen as a surprise that Onana started that, and Ten Hag said afterwards, we want him to build up his confidence, because the week earlier he'd made the mistake against Bayern Munich, so it was ensuring that he stayed in the team. They didn't even want to take him out of the team for a game like that. Maybe if they were playing a Championship or a League One side, they would have made that change in goal. But it was such an obvious night, especially given that Palace just hit the eject button themselves from the League Cup. But if you're really trying to keep Onana in play just for a cup game against relegation fodder in League One, that doesn't say a lot of. That doesn't suggest that the manager has a great deal of confidence in the backup goalkeeper that was signed on deadline day and has still not made his debut. So I just saying to Onana, go to AFCON, you try and get your confidence up with your national team, have a good tournament there, come back, and I think it's a maximum of five games that he could miss. It's not the end of the world. I mean, United have had Januaries where they've played 9 games before. They could play most likely 3 games this month. So it's not an end of days scenario. And as I said, it's not like United are fighting for the title, and it's not like Onana has been performing brilliantly either. There has to come a point where you play Bayindir, and also if Bayindir plays and he's an absolute disaster, then you can put Tom Heaton in against Tottenham on the Sunday, because that has to come into consideration as well, where Bayindir is seen as a bit of an unknown quantity. I mean, he looks pretty decent in the warm-ups before games, but that's very different to actually starting a competitive game for United. And beyond that, I think you've just got to freshen the team up a bit, but also it's going to be kept quite strong. I think that I suspect that with Højlund back, he'll probably revert to Rashford on the left, Garnacho on the right. Fernandes will start. Kobbie Mainoo has to start. I mean, going back to the Mainoo substitution at Forest, it was quite amusing reading on the United websites their version of those quotes.
Offers context, and
yeah. I'm surprised they didn't even mention how the mileage that Mainoo clocked up in that game. It was he's 18, he's only started his first Premier League game the other month and whatnot. The fact that there's a 9-day gap between games, and that he did all.
And this is a guy who played 80 minutes at Anfield, played 75 minutes at Wilson. So was brilliant in both.
80 odd minutes against Aston Villa.
But he can't handle 45 minutes of the City ground.
And it was an appalling first half as well. It wasn't exactly a taxing first half for anyone in that game. It wasn't intense, very, very rarely intense. So yeah, Mainoo, and I think if you can't play Mainoo and Eriksen against Wigan, then there's got to be something wrong there. They've shown reasonable promise, if not against Forest, then against Villa. Evans and Varane, I suppose, and if Luke Shaw's back, Luke Shaw left back, probably Dalot right back, and you look at that team, you think that team is comfortably good enough to beat a League One team. I don't think we'd necessarily say they're comfortably good enough to beat a Premier League team given United's form, but if they put a team out like that, it should be a good night for the 6,000 odd United fans in the away end.
Said should a lot of times, didn't you? We will see. We'll see what happens when we come back for the Manchester Red podcast. Producer Seb, are we doing one later in the week? We will be back later in the week then. Okay. You'll get more Wigan preview then if you do subscribe. We shall see. We'll get Samuel's final verdict then on the game.
Reflections on Ben Amos ahead of his reunion.
Thank you very much, Samuel, for joining us.
Thank you, Rich.
Podcast. Thank you very much again, wherever you are in the world, for listening. As always, please do leave a like, a review, and subscribe if you haven't already. If you're watching on YouTube, thank you very much. If you're not, the link will be in the description below. Make sure you do that. Also, there will have been an advert in this podcast for the Manchester Evening News Premium app. Make sure you give that a go while we have the offer on this month. Take care, and we'll see you again next time.